I understand, Rob. I feel you. No, I do.
Yeah, what are you gonna do? And the thing is, you're bringing out a really good point because when you think about like when you think about the idea of the concept of like, okay, we're in America, we're Black people, and at the time they were like, okay, um, they were like, you guys are not allowed to read.
Mm-hmm.
If you read, that means you're gonna be able to learn the fact that we have created a land that was supposed to be based around like equality for all people, right? Like that's the concept of America, right? So the fact that we've now put you in slavery, right, is contradicting, like our value system, right? Like who we say we are, right? But and then at a point they made it legal for you to read, so you could read books, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I was a white American and I saw that and I say, hey, you know what? If they would make it illegal for Black people to read a book because if they learned more, they could potentially be competitive or change their status or disruption or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about me? Why do I believe that they gave me all the information? Why do I believe that they put me in a position for success? Ah, because I have it better than the Black person.
Mm-hmm.
Or so I'm supposed to think, right? So this idea, like you're bringing out, is this idea of saying that maybe that's why we as like a human society, like especially in America, have like kind of like stayed at a similar level in terms of our status in America. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like if you were saying that the more Kedusha a person connects to, the more forces that Hashem, is going to create that's going to allow that person to earn that Kedusha,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's going to allow that person to earn it because you only can get it through the challenge, right? It's not like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you're learning and then, you go and lay out on the beach and you pass out. This whole thing is like, no, the process of the Kedusha comes through the process of challenge. First, you bring down the Ruchnias through tefillah, through learning Torah, through even mitzvahs. And then, you have another situation where um, you have a challenge, something in your life, something that pops up, and how you deal with that based off of that knowledge allows the full revealment of that light to
Mm-hmm.
come in. So it's parts, right? So the thing is, it's saying, so if that's the reality, that means the more success I have as a person, or the more influence I have as a person, there's going to be these forces around me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is, me and you, we're talking about it right now, but who else knows about that? What CEO, what business person, what music artist, what actor, what politician, what person says like, hey, as I'm going up, I'm going to have more Citra Aqua around me,
Mm-hmm.
which means I have to do more restrictions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Right. I have to do more restrictions, right? And so, um, um, I just like thought about something. Anyway, so the point is just saying, so, so that's that. So what is my point? I'm saying we've been maneuvering, just say as Black people, we haven't took that into account. When we look at like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and different people, they didn't understand restrictions. I mean, they were dedicated to their beliefs, but if they understood the impact of the energies that they were dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they would have moved differently. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even a guy like Ye. You know what I mean? Like just different people. Like they would have moved differently if they understood. Like none of these people are on my team. Why you got to go and get beat up to come and realize that no one was you couldn't see that, or
Mm-hmm.
even the Black community as a whole. So you told me after civil rights you weren't expecting some type of an attack from the system.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all just did civil rights, Doug. So that means you challenged the government, right? You challenged the infrastructure. You challenged you disrupted the norm the what would be considered normal, the normality, right? You disrupted that. Oh, we got to put drugs in that community. We got to create legislation, get the dad out the house. We got this. We got to shut this down. We got to just. They were sitting in the office figuring this out. Dog. They were at war. We were not at war. We
Way
thought
back.
it was all good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they were sitting in those offices looking at it and being like, hey, you know what? These black people are a massive problem to power. Massive problem. And they're unified and they're just unbelievably. They're beautiful, they're charismatic. We got to stop this, Doug. We can't have no more Martin Luther Kings, no more, any of these types of characters coming out of the community. We need Jay-Z.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going in against Jay-Z, but I'm saying they made that guy the spokesperson for black people now.
Mm-hmm.
Ye has more power than any politician from the black community. You know what I'm saying? Like in terms of
Mm-hmm.
voice,
Oh, for sure.
right? But I'm saying that was strategically moved. You know what I'm saying? Like that was a move. We look at it like, oh, they honoring hip hop. We're hip hop, hip hop. They're thinking, okay, yeah, I get that, right? But on the flip side, they want that to be the case. They want Cardi B to be a black voice in politics. They want
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
because that's part of the system of that. That is the concept of subjugation. So we're not even thinking like that. We're like, hey man, it's all good. We're like, wait, it's crack up in here, man.
Mm-hmm.
And there's blocks of people for blocks and blocks lined up to get this chemical, right? Like this is what was like actually strategically done, bro. Right? And so it's just like when you look at that, it's like this is crazy. Being out of America so long and you just like you're looking at America and you're watching America and you're like looking at these contradictions. It's like, bro, the mindset in America is like this. It's part of the social infrastructure now for black people to not when it comes to wealth distribution, right? Like black people systematically get less money
Mm-hmm.
because of their race. Now
Mm-hmm.
we're just so used to that. We're like, oh yeah, we're black and this, the whole concept. But that's crazy. That's a crazy concept. Like the fact that there's a group of people that are treated differently in a society because of their skin tone.
That's
And,
it.
and have been abused the whole way.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy, bro. Like it doesn't make any sense. Like a society is functioning like this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just saying, so the point is saying that when we're learning and we're building an expanded consciousness. So we could clearly see like this is not reality. This is not reality, right? In all the promises that come from our obedience are empty. It's totally empty promises. You know what I'm saying? And so that is the study and the ability to critique, society and to be able to see what's going on and to be able to see how the systems and these things are laid out because it's a very it's a very interesting thing. You know what I mean? Like the whole social construct of America as it relates to the black experience is like so fascinating. You know what I mean? And it needs to evolve. You know what I mean? It needs to evolve. And but you have to have a vision. And a group of people have to have a vision to really bring these ideas out to the public to say like, hey, you know what? We're not feeling a black thing anymore. The name,
Mm-hmm.
like it's there. It's this. I mean, some people could still identify as it, but you know what? Maybe we want to be known as Israelites, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we're defined in American society. Not Black Hebrew Israelites, Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us may even identify as Jew,
Mm-hmm.
and this is our part of our heritage, the whole thing. Now somebody else will be like upset about that. They'll be like, no, why would you do that?
Of
Because
course.
that's what we see ourselves as. We've been holy by this for 200 years in America.
Hmm.
200 years, bro. Like, you know how long that is for black people? From the extent that America have these people coming off of slave ships and generation after generation after generation have been saying this, even to the point we got our brothers out in the corners that everyone's mad at.
Right.
And so if I could say that because of my history and my lineage, and then I talk to the Igbos, I talk to these people, they're like, yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
you guys are our descendants. Yeah, we're the same, right? So so when you see that dynamic, then it's like when you see that dynamic, then it's like, what else do we need? And more importantly, I don't really even have to prove it to you. I'm just saying, in America, I have the right to define myself the way that I want to.
Hmm.
This guy said he's a Muslim. This guy said he's a Jew. He decides his ethnicity. So if I decide that I want to identify myself differently, or the same way as my other brothers do,
Hmm.
right? Are you going to protest it? You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Like, what if you know, I may start identifying as white.
Yeah, there's an
I'm just
episode.
saying.
No,
It's just the
I've seen
color.
it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was a guy who did that. He was like, I identify as white. They were like, you're black though. He was like, no, I'm white. Look at my
Yeah,
mannerisms. Look how I
yeah.
talk. Look at the things I do. Look at my 401k. He was like, I'm white. It was a trip. I can't remember what show it was on. But
I think maybe it was Dave Chappelle.
either it might be Dave Chappelle or it might be Atlanta, but it's
Mm.
somewhere. I think Dave Chappelle got one too. But one thing I think about Rob too is like the spiritual, like for African Americans to come anywhere near Judaism, right? If you just look at the structure of it, it makes no sense. It
Mm.
makes absolutely no sense. Like
That's a good point. That's a good point.
for a group of people to even attract in that way, where there's not, I don't want to say there's barriers, but it's there's no representation whatsoever. You know what I mean? So for
There's no welcoming committee.
it's not, and it's like even from a spiritual standpoint, like if these people have been completely lost, right? Slave trade, identities taken away. Malcolm X, his last name is X. I don't even know who I am. You know what I mean? For them to stream towards anywhere near the complete opposite of what the social structure has created. We look at white, it's like, man, all the stuff we've been through, trauma, this, and that. I don't want to go there. But we still kind of gravitate towards that. That's a that's beyond, like reason. Like
Mm.
that's a spiritual beacon. That's something awakening in the soul. You know what I mean? And it's like if that's happening, that should be identified and looked at. Like, hold on. Where
You're saying really good and really big, right?
like
Because like this,
mm,
when you look at the whole dynamic with black people in Islam, right?
mm,
The thing about it, you know, you're making a huge point because it's like at the end of the day, they were Christians, right?
mm,
And they had Christian communities and they had a lot of success being Christians, and the society supported Christianity. You know what I mean? Now, someone could argue the militancy, right, is what attracted black people.
mm,
But the militancy, you could have found that in Christianity,
mm,
right? You could have found like radical Christians that were into their black pride and black nationalism, but it was the idea of one God and God not being physical, right? And God is towards the east, right? That that is the part that I agree with you. That those dynamics need to be really critiqued because many of those kids, those grandchildren of there, or even children of those, right? Many of them got into Judaism.
mm,
A lot of the black people that I know that are converted to Judaism, or people that came from black Muslim families,
mm,
And so I was just saying when we look at that relationship of the guy, and I was having this conversation with someone else, was this idea that like black people they weren't even allowed to read, right?
mm,
So their dynamic with God. was like on some. It was like on an internal thing only.
That's it.
There was no books. There was no Torah. There was nothing. It was just this inner spark that allowed them to press forward and to believe in the unseen reality.
Mm-hmm.
This is like Abraham Avinu,
Mm-hmm.
and so that element is extremely special. That these people weren't allowed to read, they were not allowed to be educated, but within that, they were able to connect to an internal spirituality that turned into song, that turned into dance, that turned into art, right?
Mm-hmm.
Poems, right? And it turned into these expressions with no information. There was no schools. They were slaves. They woke up, they went to plantation, they came home, they ate and slept.
Mm-hmm.
That was your life. And they created culture out of this reality of seemingly no godliness, right? And even if you want to say the church and this and that dynamic, it's like just because your slave master makes you go to this church and they tell you about this guy, that doesn't create hope like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, if that was the case, you just captured people and, Anyways, so the point is just saying that just these are just things that just think about, like when we're going through these processes of learning and building, because that's it's not just like, it's not intellectual. It's like it's your soul, it's your existence. It's everything. When we're going to learn, this Berachot, it's like this is like this is learning information that like my ancestry like it was like their soul, but it couldn't be revealed. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's getting back to that, because we're talking about this is the Gemara. This is like we're learning the Gemara, right? This is like Babylon, Talmud Babli, right? So that means the sages of that time, these were their exact words. Nobody, people got, oh, I don't like the Talmud said this, I don't like the Talmud said. People say that, but no one doubts the authenticity. Nobody. We're talking about 2,000 years, bro. We're talking about the people who wrote this stuff we're reading. These people saw the destruction of the temple that was prophesied. You know what I'm saying? And then went into Babylon and put this information together. All right. So, all right. So where we're at is we're trying to understand this idea of the evening Shema, right? And what is night? We learn that there's three stages of the night. You can say one stage is from the time the sun sets into midnight, and then you have from midnight to like say maybe it's like 3-ish in the morning, and then you have from there to dawn, right? And so what we're trying to understand is that when the Torah tells us to say the Shema when we lie down, what exactly is implied, right? What does it mean, right? Does it mean we should say it lying down, right? Because you can read the pasuk and maybe you hear it that way. You should say this when you're lying down. You got to say this thing when you're lying down. Lie down and say it, right? You could say that, or you could say lying down is talking about the time when you go to sleep, right? And so the question is, okay, so when's the earliest you can do it, and when's the latest, right? And that's what the Gemara is trying to understand, right? And the reason why we want to have this train of thought is because we want to be in the mindset and say, hey, guess what? That we're in a mindset and we're like, hey, that when we do the Shema, that we're not just saying Shema Israel, right? We're going through this whole expressive process of wanting to understand Hashem and understand Hashem's ways. And this is a part of that experience of saying the Shema, right? And it's the same thing for any brachot, any tefillah, like anything that we do and we learn it out. It's like it becomes a part of it. We have a whole nother relationship with the words and why we're singing. And this, it's like it's not just like, okay, the sages say do it. Go ahead. The sages say do it. Very nice. Wow. The sages say it. Why are you doing it? Sages say it. Okay, good. No, we want to know why the sages say that, and then how they came to these conclusions, because all of this is connecting and clinging to Hashem, clinging to God, Devekut, right? And so it's like that clinging to Hashem. That's our lives. It's every day. Every day we're clinging to Hashem. We dive in. We're clinging to Hashem. We say Berachot in the morning, clinging to Hashem. So now we're dealing with the Shema, right? And in this thing called the Shema, and we see that. So there's an issue, right? So the Gemara so says Ma'ira mi minehu matai mat kilim lekararot kariat shema be'ari be'ravit be'ravit. This is Aramaic, so it's like like it's the saying arvit. It says be'aravit. Anyways, all right. So it's saying like this. So it's saying like the Gemara raises a contradiction from Tosfos. So we know Tosfos is Rashi's descendants, and Tosfos is like, in a classic normal Gemara today, you have one side of the page, which is Rashi, and on the outside of the page, and the inside of the page, you usually have Tosfos. Now, the thing about Rashi is usually used in Gemara to clarify, like what is being said in a clear text, right? Similar to how he does in the Chumash, right, in the commentaries. Tosfos' thing is that Tosfos wanted to basically deal with conceivable contradictions, right? So Tosfos would bring a question, like if the Gemara makes a statement in, say, this particular book, right? Tosfos will find somewhere else where there was a similar ruling or a contradictory ruling in a similar scenario, and it would bring that to a question, right? And then by learning out, and I'm not saying that's all Tosfos does, but I'm saying they're famous for that, is to be able to bring and to show the connection between one Masechta and another Masechta, right? The one book of the Talmud, another book of the Talmud, is Tosfos, brings that to the table, right? And so Tosfos, so the Gemara is a contradiction from a Tosfos. Okay, so there's a Tosfos that I guess is stated, Tosfos that is stated, and I was going to see what Tosfos says. Okay, so it says, so Gemara is a contradiction from a Tosfos from Tosfos. From where does one begin to recite the Shema in the evening, right? What time, right? So this is the question. From what time do people okay, from the time. So the response is that he asking questions. From what time, the Tosfos is saying, what time does one begin reciting the Shema? Okay, and he says, you probably remember this a little bit from last week or last time we learned. And so he says, from the time when people enter to eat their bread on Shabbat Eve, right? So he's saying like basically like right after Shkia, after sunset, after people pray, boom, they run in there ready to eat. They're starving, right? So he said this statement is of Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir says the time you do the Shema is from the time after Shkia, around the time a person will normally eat Shabbat dinner, right? So this statement of Rabbi Meir, as they do in our Mishnah, the rabbis say from the time that you partake in the Truma. So they're saying in the Mishnah, as I said earlier, with the Kohanim, by the time they go into the mikvah and eat the Truma, right? They're purified. He said that's around the same time that Rabbi Meir is saying. So they're comparing here, the Gemara is comparing what Rabbi Meir is saying in terms of his look. He says, so saying like this statement of Rabbi Meir, as they do in our Mishnah, the rabbi says, from the time when the priests are eligible to partake in the Truma, a sign of which the appearance of the stars, and although there is no explicit proof that the emergence of the stars is when one may begin to recite the Shema, there's an allusion to it in the book of Nehemiah, right? To the fact that the emergence of the stars is generally considered the beginning of the night. And so now they're going to bring this verse. So he's saying like this. He's saying Rabbi Meir, who's a huge Tana, right? Rabbi Meir Balanes, wow, big person. So Rabbi Meir is saying like is saying the Gemara is showing that the Rabbi Meir is saying the the Mishnah, right? And the Mishnah is saying basically when the stars comes out. And so the Gemara is saying that 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 they assume from the connection between the time you eat on Shabbat, if you hold by Rabbi Meir, or if you hold by the Mishnah that brings the idea of the Kohanim, right? From both of those, you could deduce that they're speaking of the time when the stars are out. And they said, okay. And he says, but there's no explicit proof from that. But there is an insight or like a hint to such an idea in the book of Nehemiah, right? This is where the idea of rimis comes in, right? It's like this idea that there's a hint. It says like this, right? Pashad is the basic level. Rimis is the hints. The drash is the interpretation from that hint per se, or that insight. In the sod is a deeper inner essence of Kabbalah. So I say so Nehemiah. So Nehemiah to the fact. So Nehemiah says something that alludes to the night, the day, or the night begins, or the day begins with or the evening begins, when the stars appear. He says, as is stated in regard to building of the walls in Jerusalem. Wow. So it's an interesting time, to think about, because we just had the 10th of Tevet a while ago, and that was culminating like the idea of when the city, was starting to be surrounded, right? And so he says, and we perform the work, and half of them grasp their spears and draw and from the dawn until the emergence of the stars. So he's saying because of this verse, he said in this verse it's an insight to it, and it says another verse, and it says that the night may be a guard to us, and may labor in the day. He said the night should be a guard to us and may labor in the day. It says in Nehemiah. From here, there's an assertion that the day ends with the emergence of stars. Okay, so this is the Gemara's conclusion. So that's the thing. Like when we see the amazingness of the sages, right? They're not just coming up with stuff, right? Okay, some things are clear, some things are not clear. Some things there's allusions to it, whatever. But the point is, how do we do it? And not just saying, "Oh, I read the verse and it says do this and blah blah blah," and because of that, I'm fulfilling the ratzon of Hashem, right? So it says, so here's a question. He's coming, my ve'amrei. So he says, so even before we analyze these sources, the Gemara seeks to clarify a confusing element in the Tosfos. In their biblical proof, the rabbis do not suffice with one verse, but rather they say, and it was, I think it's where we left off last week, actually. Last time. She says, and rather they say, and it says, and they cite an additional verse. Okay, so he says before we could. Okay, so he's saying there's another verse that they also brought. So let's try to understand what this contradiction is that's being brought, right? So so let's go back over it. So the Gemara says the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Tosfos. Okay, so what is this contradiction that Tosfos is bringing? He says, from where does one recite it? So the question is, the issue is, what time do we recite the Shema? And he brings one source that says it's from the time, he brings Rabbi Meir, who says it's from the time people, eat Shabbat dinner, right? And then he says the rabbis say in the Mishnah, right? And they also agree, like Rabbi Meir, that by saying it's the time of the Truma, which both times are there for both times are there to illustrate the sun coming, the stars coming out, right? So there's two opinions that agree with each other. So right now we're trying to understand what is the contradiction that Tosfos is trying to bring to us. So that's what we're trying to understand now. We're not just want to just keep going. I want to be clear about this, right? So he says, although there's no explicit proof. Okay, so so now that they bring these 2 points, I guess the contradiction is that there's no clear proof that either one of these positions are true, right? And he says there is an allusion to this in a verse in Nehemiah, and there's 2 verses in Nehemiah, right? And he says, and even before analyzing these sources, right, the Gemara seeks to clarify a confusing element in the Tosfos. In their biblical proofs, the rabbis do not suffice with one verse, but rather they say, and it says that they cite in an additional verse. What is added by the use of and what does it say? It seems superfluous, and the entire proof appears in the first verse. Okay, so he's asking the question on this thing. So the question is, and this is the way I'm understanding it, right? In their biblical proof, here's the issue, right? The rabbis do not suffice with one verse, but rather they say, and it is cited in an additional verse. So they're trying to understand this additional verse that they brought. So I'm saying, the way I'm understanding it, let me see if we can get a little more clarity. Yeah, we understand that. I just want to be clear. It's not so simple, you know. There is. Yeah, this guy in Spanish. Read this whole thing. Um, let me try to just figure out where Rashi. All right. So he only brings 2 points. Okay. So let me just, I got to think this out. Okay. I just want to be clear on what's happening, right? Okay. So the Gemara raises a contradiction to a Tosfos. Okay. So I guess this Tosfos they're asking a question. Why do they need this additional verse as a proof? That's what I'm understanding they're saying at this point. They're just saying, like, why do they need the additional verse? Why couldn't he just have this one verse? This is what I think it's saying. Okay, I'm not exactly clear, but we'll go back. But this is the challenge. Gemara is not easy. So it says Veki Tema Miki Arva Shim Shimsha. So it says, and he says the Gemara answers that the first verse was not sufficient. Okay, so the issue that we have, I think I'm pretty much right. So the issue is they're asking you bring these 2 verses. Why do you need these 2 verses to make this point, right? And so now the Gemara is coming back. It says Vekite Miki Asava. So it says Shemi Shala Lalaya. So it says like this. So the Gemara answers that the first verse was not sufficient, as if you say that night begins with the sun when the sun sets, but the workers stayed late and arrived early. Due to the importance of their task, they worked even into the night. In anticipation of this objection, the second verse was cited. It says, "Come here." He says, "Come in here," right? As it stated that the night may be a guard to us, and may my labor be in the day. Wow, you see this? And the time between dawn and the emergence of the stars is explicitly referred to as day, providing that night begins with the emergence of the stars. Okay, so it's a very important part here. So it feels good. See, we got out of there. We were struggling. We didn't know. We were swimming. We were like, wait, what's going on? Ah, and then the Gemara pulls us out. Okay, so we were trying to understand why they brought these 2 verses. Why can you just have one verse, right? Why can you just have one verse, right? And so the Gemara explains that if you just have one verse, they both verses are there to support each other. If someone would have had an objection and saying, "Oh, well, what about this?" This other verse comes and he debunks it. So what is that dynamic? He said the first verse is not sufficient, as if you say that the night begins with the sunset, but the workers stayed late and arrived early. due to the importance of their task, that they work even into the night. So if you said the first verse says, if you say that it begins at sun, but the workers stayed late and arrived early due to the importance of their task. So if you understood it just by the aspect of work, right? Then you could say, well, the time could be any. I mean, it doesn't have a set. It doesn't have a set. Let's read it inside. So it says like this: Vekim temam mekiyam arva shimsha lalayla hu ve'am nehu. So it says. So it says. He says, as if you say that the night begins when the sun sets. Okay, but the worker stays late and arrives early. Right. So it says that in the verse, right? Okay. So he says from he says okay he says okay. So this is the thing. So he wasn't. So the two verses that they're talking about are here, right? In this Nehemiah, right? They're asking the question on the Nehemiah, right? So that's something. So this is one of the things about the Gemara. Like you may feel that you understand the flow, and then you'll go further, and you're like, "Wow, I didn't really understand that," and then you go back, right? So it's normal. This is how this is working out. That's why people spend hours and hours to get it because you think you understand. So the issue is here. The issue is on these two verses, right? That's why some people just go through it and then go back in depth, just so they could get the flow of the Gemara. Because like at a certain point, you think it's a certain way, and they go first. So really, the whole issue here is these two verses, right? And so they're asking questions: why do you need these two verses? So he says, and we perform the work, and half of them grasp their spears from dawn into the emergence of the night stars. So he's saying you could learn from this verse that perhaps the evening starts, it could start even later, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the stars being out, right? Because it says we perform work, and half of them grasp their spears until dawn, and emerge in the emergence of until the emergence of the stars, right? So, and then the second verse says, "In that in the he says, in that in the night shall be guard to us, in the labor by day." Okay. So over here he said so over here they're commenting on these verses, and they're talking about why these two verses were needed, right? So he says, okay, so the Gemara answers, so over here he's asking the question. He says, in their biblical proof, the rabbis did not do not suffice with one verse, but rather they have two. So this is what they're talking about down here, right? All right, we got it. All right, and so these are the two verses. So they're asking, why do you need both of these verses? This one of them is fine, right? They're actually right next to each other. So why do you need both? He said because they wouldn't be sufficient to have one. He said because if you read the first verse that says, if you say that in the beginning that when the sun sets, but the workers stayed late and arrived early due to the importance of their task, they worked into the night in anticipation of the so the whole point is saying that someone could argue that it's not sunset because, or when the sun goes down, because the guys are working, right? They're working. So they could go into the night to finish their tasks, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean the verse doesn't have to mean when the stars first show. It could mean, someone could learn it and say, oh, it's not when the stars come out. Actually, it's later. It could be later because if it's based off of me working in my labor, then it could go. So he says the second verse comes, and I hope I explained that correctly with Hashem's help. And in anticipation of this objection, the second verse. So someone who's a smarty pants will say, it doesn't mean I have to do it at nightfall because it says clearly here. He says he stayed late and arrived early. So how do you know that that means stayed late means sunset, right? He said, but begins with the sunset, but stayed late, right? All right. If he said the night, but he stayed late. Okay. So he says over here. So the response is that this other verse is here for the smarty pants, right? The person says, I got you. He says, no. He says that in the night they may be a guard to us, and may labor in the day. So he says the time between dawn and the emergence of the stars is explicitly referred to as day, providing that night begins with the emergence of the stars. So that's what they're to reconcile. So that so we're gonna keep going. We'll keep going. So it says. So I think we're kind of clear on that, right? So it says ka salacha da'atach de'ani uvene adam chad sorry shiura who. And so he says, in analyzing the 3 points, in analyzing the 3 opinions regarding the period of time for the recitation of the evening Shema, the Gemara begins with the with the sub position. It might enter your mind to say that when a poor person typically eats his meal and the time when an ordinary person eats their Shabbat meal are one and the same time. Since you remember that earlier, like when they talk about the idea of they had other opinions earlier, right? So we're going through a set of opinions. That's we got to review those sugya. So he says, so he says the ordinary people eat their Shabbat evening meal are one. He says, and at the same time, since both cases are eating, would would seek to begin their meals as early as possible for different reasons. They are unable to kindle additional lights to their illuminating meals. And if you say that a poor person's meal in the time when a priest purifies himself is permitted to partake to this the truma are one in the same time, then the opinion of rabbis is identical to Rabbi Meir, right? So he says, what is their disagreement? Not so clear on that point. Okay, so he says the poor man mentioned in the Braita who has the evening meal early is lacking is early through lacking of artificial light. In Okay, so we understood that from last time. He says the reasoning may be simplified by calling the meal time for the poor person A, in that the people of on Shabbat B, in that of the priest that partakes in the truma C. You like that? And he says in this paragraph, A is assumed to be equal to B. If then A is equal to C, then C and B, but Rav Meir, who adopted B, is contrast with the sages who adopted C. So these cannot be identical. Okay, so now that this is the issue. So we got to break this down. Thank you. Okay, so this is the issue. That's what I was trying to figure out. What they're saying. What is the disagreement? Okay, so this is the science of it, and we'll kind of like stop here because if we don't, we're gonna just keep going, right? But this is how we do it, bro. So normally we have a pen and we write this down, okay? And this is a good, beautiful outline by Rob Abraham Cohen. He should be blessed in his family. And so it says, so the reasoning may be simplified by calling the meal of a poor person that of a. Okay, so a meal of a poor person in the meal of a personal Shabbat meal, A and B, right? So those two people, A and B, we say normally that the poor person and the person Shabbos Eve have in common that they both have a limited time of access to candle lighting. So they'd be more than likely wanting to do it earlier, right? And eat their meal, right? Because the sun time, right? And he says in the priest with the truma is C. So the priest goes in at sundown, right? And he goes in the mikvah and he eats his truma, right? He says in this paragraph, A is assumed to be equal to B, right? The A with the poor man and the Shabbat meal, right? So that we're assuming that they're alike so far, right? So he's saying those two things are together. Okay, he says. Okay, he says. Okay, in this paragraph, A is equal to B, assumed to be equal to B. He says then A, the poor person meal is then supposed to be equal to C, right? which is the truma. He said, then B and C. It says then B equals C. He says if he says A is equal, so the poor person meal is equal to the eating of the truma by the priest. Then B, which is the Shabbat evening, equals C. He says, but Rabbi Meir, who adopts B, is contrast with the sages who adopted C. So they cannot be identical. Okay, so they're trying to. So okay, so basically, what is Rabbi Meir's disagreement with? What is Rabbi Meir's disagreement with the rabbis who hold that truma is the thing, right? That truma. Why doesn't why if Rabbi Meir knows this Mishnah, right? He's a Tana, right? If he knows this Mishnah, why doesn't he just use this? Why does he have a separate opinion? Why does he bring a different source? So if he's bringing this different source, it must mean that he doesn't agree with the position of the other sages who say it's by truma. You understand that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's the kasha, right? That's the kasha. When we're gonna leave here, right? This is it's some hard work. We'll talk it out for a second, but yeah. So right now, the Gemara is challenging us on Rabbi Meir's disagreement with the other sages. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? And what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I was kind of thinking. Uh, so one, it's similar, but it's kind of off. Like with Shabbat, when do you when do you eat your Shabbat meal in the winter time? Do you or no in the summertime when it's later? Like do you do Kabbalah Shabbat, go through all your brachas, then you eat like at 9 or something, 8 o'clock, or
Everybody has their own thing.
so how do you do it? Because I always do Kabbalah Shabbat first
It
and try
depends.
to.
I mean, and when I'm doing Shabbat at my house,
Mm,
it depends where I pray at. If I pray in my house,
mm,
I pray in my house, or I go to a shul or something. I'm in Israel, so there's places all over. So
mm,
maybe I'll do that, right? So normally, I personally like davening in my house. I would normally daven with my wife in the house, like we'll kind of do our davening together. And sometimes we'll go to shul, but it's like walking up the steps, the Shabbat elevator, it's a whole thing. So that's what I would normally. That's what I would normally. That's what I would normally. Just lost my train of thought again. Yeah, so I would normally go right into it. You know what I mean? I usually got just daven. Mincha obviously earlier on Wednesday. On Friday try to do as early as possible
mm,
and set everything up in the house. Do you get your shopping? Cooking. It is good to do it the day before if you can, but sometimes I just like things very fresh,
mm.
right? And so like for me the day of is not such a problem. Like if I had kids or things like that, it may be more difficult, right? But um so yeah, I go right into it.
So I think so with Rabbi Meir, when he's saying that he agrees with, I believe it was C, that might have been B, but when the people take on
B.
Shabbat,
Rabbi Meir is
take on
B.
B. So that's the earliest time to say Shema. That's what I'm gaining from him from saying when because people are trying to take on Shabbat as early as possible, right?
Yeah.
But it's not when the candles are lit because it's 18 minutes before sunset, and then it's not Shakia because that's sunset. So then when the stars come out, it's almost like they're all saying the same thing almost. Like when are they dictating when the stars come out? Is that the time where you say Shema, or is it? because I always wondered that, like when it, especially when it comes to Shabbat, like can I can't why can't I say Shema once I light the candles? Once I've taken on the Shabbat, does that initially take me into the night now, even though it's not? Or do I have to wait till the stars come out to say Shema? I mean, I've been waiting till the stars come out, but I just think about it because once you light the candles, you're taking on the kedusha of Shabbat. If there's anything that needs to be done still, you have to have the kavanah as you're lighting. That I need to do this, I need to do that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about with Rabbi Mayer's point, and I could be completely off, probably am, but
So you're bringing out some good points. All right. Okay. So the first opinion is because we're trying to figure out the in a way the why. Where's the connection to this first set of night, right?
mm-hmm,
So these are all opinions that we should be doing the Shema on the first part of the night, right? So the first opinion is by the idea of a poor person, right?
mm-hmm,
So a
mm-hmm,
poor person, eats, relatively early because, they may not have access, to candles,
mm-hmm,
these types of things.
mm-hmm,
And so therefore, they don't want to be eating in the dark. So they're gonna eat closer to the stars a lot coming down. And when they light their candles, they only have so much time, right? That's why I understood it, right? Was the candles was the issue, right?
mm-hmm,
Yeah. All right. And then the second one is Rabbi Meir brings this one, and the second one is when people do Shabbat, right? Because Shabbat that, right? And then the third one is by Truma, right? The third one is by Truma. So Truma is actually in the Mishnah, right? So the way I understand the question is that they're asking a question and they're saying, why doesn't Rabbi Meir hold like the rabbis, right? Why doesn't he take that opinion? Why does he bring this other opinion, right? Because
mm-hmm,
they're all Tanaim, right? Those rabbis are Tanaim. Those are the big guys, right? Of the Mishnah. So why doesn't Rabbi Meir agree? Why does he hold a different opinion than the rest of the sages,
mm-hmm,
right? And so I think the Gemara kind of hinted it earlier. He's saying the Gemara hinted it earlier when they're talking about Nehemiah, right?
mm-hmm,
And they were saying that perhaps a person could learn it, that they could go through the night because they were doing something, a work that was like really, intense, I mean, that's something they had to do. So, someone doesn't have to necessarily hold that. You can say it's night, but they don't have to say as the stars are first come out, you should do, right? So they bring the second verse to say, by day you labor,
mm-hmm,
right? And so that by day labor, right? By that day labor, right? Then you understand that you cut it off.
mm-hmm,
So perhaps Rabbi Meir is bringing this idea around Shabbat because it's more strict.
mm-hmm,
You see what I'm saying? Because it's
mm-hmm,
Shabbat, right? Because it's Shabbat, you're not going to do it per se much later on because you only have so much candlelight.
mm-hmm,
But a poor guy, he may come. He could be like the guy who labors in the night. He's like, hey, my girl coming over at 11, so I'm gonna hold my candles back.
mm-hmm,
And when she gets here, we're gonna have a dinner, and I'm gonna light the candles and do it. So it doesn't necessarily mean does not necessarily mean it dafka has to be at the sun setting,
mm-hmm,
right? I mean, in general, yeah, but I mean, but it doesn't have to be. And the same thing by the Nehemiah verse. Just because someone it ceases to labor, in the night, it doesn't mean exactly at when the sun. It could be in the second stage of the night, right? So I think Rabbi Meir, and we'll see. But I think Rabbi Meir's position is um, that his position is more stark. His is like by Shabbos, it's only going to be by the stars coming down, and there's no chance of anything later.
mm-hmm,
As by the Kohanim, they could also go later to the mikveh, right? They don't have to go exactly when the stars go up, but they're going to go to the mikveh before they eat their truma. So also that doesn't have the same starkness of time, right? So we'll see as we build with the Gemara, but I'm pretty sure that'll be the text. All right. So so let's go further. Hold on 1 second. Any points, any thoughts on that, what I just said?
No, no. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, the real toil is in Gemara. That's yeah, that's a real toil. Trying to get all those points and I'm just making sure it's cohesive.
Okay, so we're back in Kav HaYasher. We continue to straighten ourselves, and we'll see where Rabbi Sweet takes us on this amazing journey. Rabbi Sweet, please join us as we learn your Torah. Okay, so he says Ketiv. Ketiv always means written, right? So he's bringing, when it says written, it always brings a pasuk. So you see how it's written. It says Ketiv Yeshiyahu. Noon. Okay, so it sounds like this. So anyways, he's bringing a pasuk, right? He's bringing a pasuk from Nehemiah. It says Vehalek lifanecha Sadi Echa Kavod Hashem. So he says, and it's written. He says, and he says, and your charity shall go before you, and honor the honor of Hashem will gather you in Yeshayahu. He says, and it is taught in a Bryce in Berachot. We're just learning Berachot. We're different Masechta. They're 51a. We're on 2a. Okay, so imagine how much we're gonna change by the time you get to 54.8. Just like your whole thinking, all these, like your mind, you'd be blown out. God willing, all of us. All right. So he says, taught in Brachos, one who sees a large gathering of Jews should recite a blessing, the one who is wise in secret knowledge, for their minds are so their mind. She says, for their minds are diverse. And in the same vein, I will tell you that people have different mindsets regarding the giving of charity, and the doing of loving kindness. Okay, so let's be clear what's being said. Okay, so the Gemara says when you see it opens up with this verse, he broke the verse, he says that your charity shall go before you, the honor of Hashem will gather in you. Okay, so when I hear your charity will go before you, I think about when someone's passed away and they're carrying their carrying their body to the grave, and all their mitzvahs go ahead of them and say, "Hey, this one is a good one. He's coming. He's coming." And they're all happy. And so he brings another thing. He says, so when a person sees a large gathering of Jews, he should recite. He should recite. Blessed is the one. Okay, so he blesses the one who is a secret, who's wise in secret. He says, for they are diverse in minds, right? He said, in the same vein, I will tell you that people have different mindsets regarding charity and love and kindness. Okay, so he's breaking this down. I don't know exactly where he's taking us with this, but we're going to see. Kama sanima ve'ina chochama le'asod sadeka. All right. So he says the first group. So I guess he's going to explain those. He's kind of doing a Ramchal in a way. He's going to categorize these different. He has different classifications for how some people understand charity and doing love and kindness. So he has a category. He's going to break it down to us. He's going to break it down. All right. So the first group consists of the ministers, or of misers. Sorry, misers. They find it impossible to give charity or to do kindness. They do not even have enough control over their wealth to provide their own food, drinks, and clothing. Such an individual are surely under the dominion of demons. And as I have already discussed in chapter 25 and 24, and they have no share in holiness. In the Sitra Gaka, it completely dominates over them. All right, so we learned that. He says, so you say basically the people who is not being able to give is a curse, right? The person is wealthy, this, the whole thing, bound, this. He's not able to give, and he's not even really even able to provide for himself. It's like when these guys have, have you ever seen some of these rich guys that just they look homeless? You know what I mean? It's like, whoa, aren't you rich? He's like, he has no access to his own money. It's crazy. So he says, Kad Mahashani, Ain Ra'aba Zela Acharima Ve'in Lo Leva Le'asod Sadaka Ki Im Ma'ata Mizreda Mechamata Hagazah. So he said the second group consists of those who are begrudgingly to war others and lack the heart to give charity beyond a pity a pittiness of satisfying their pride. All right, so it's the people who are they're not misers, but they're very selfish people, and they'll give for saying like, hey, look, I'm a big donor. Everybody look, right? So he says, yet when it comes to their own enjoyment, they eat and drink freely, and indulge themselves lightheartedly, making themselves as plump and robust as fatty calves. Concerning this group, the Zohar comments: these are the people who derive from the side of the snake. The mnemonic for them is the verse, whatever moves the belly, alluding to the snake. In other words, whomever has a large fat belly emanates from the side of the one who was cursed with the words, you shall move around on your belly. Nevertheless, the members of this group have little merit, and even if they only give to satisfy their pride. Okay, so I think it's self-explanatory. These things exist. Hashem should spare us from such darkness. He says, "Ka daha shilishi achem anase asirim asher natan Hashem." So he says, "Lachem." He says, "Oh, share." So he says the third group consists of the rich, whom Hashem has blessed with wealth, and whom indeed uses it for charity and acts of kindness. However, they do not give to the extent that it is expected of them because they still possess a measure of miserliness. For this reason, I know a lot of people like this. He says, for this reason, they're unable to compel their inclinations to give while they are alive. Instead, when they are upon their deathbed, they issue instructions that their death charity be given for the construction of the synagogues or studies halls, or to support scholars to study in their merit for a number of years. This is the altitude of the average individual. All right, so let me just go back again. So these are people that they have a little bit of that miser energy in them. That selfish swag. They have some of that inside of them, and so they don't really give as much as they have, and they have resources. I know people like this. But they're definitely they put out in his honor and this whatever this type of thing but it's a level. He says hacha daha ha. So it says har v'ia hu mi she chanan Hashem oto be oser ve oser sadaka bechai v'lifi v'as. He said the fourth group comprised those whom Hashem has blessed with wealth, and who is in fact gives charity while they are alive to a degree it is commensurate with their means, while also engaging in loving kindness and the support of Torah. And not only to support the students, they also give generously to the teachers, so they will teach the children of the poor. Certainly, certain concerning them, it's written, "And your charity shall go before you, and Hashem will honor your gathering." Right. So the first portion is the person who gives, who does it the right way. So it says ve. It says ve'em shol lecha masala le melech shehalech la milchama. So he says, and let me explain this with an analogy. Suppose that a king is on his way to battle together with his army. If the army goes before him, the king will be in no danger if they should happen to meet the enemy. But if the king goes on alone and ahead of the army, then if the heaven forbid they come across the cavalry, the knights of the enemy, they will seize them and take them captive. And even if the king is a vigilant warrior and knows how to fight, nevertheless his courage will fail him when realizing that his troops are far behind him. Okay, so let's try to understand what's going on. So he says, suppose the king, okay, here's the analogy. Suppose that there was a king who's on the way to battle and was going his way to battle together with his army. Okay, so he's going on this battle with his army, his king. If his army goes before him, the king will be in no danger. Oh wow, this is interesting. He says, if the army goes before him, the king will be in no danger. If he should happen to meet the army, but if the king goes alone ahead of his army, then heaven forbid he comes across. All right, and he says he comes across the cavalry, and the enemy will seize them and take captives. He says, and even if the king is vigilant fighter over them. Okay, so he's showing this analogy of your army being ahead of you versus your you being ahead of your army. He says, if you're going to battle the Satan, you're going out to battle another army. A king is going out to he's going out to war in 1,000 years ago, right? They're riding their horses, the whole thing, right? He says if the king goes before his soldiers, if he comes upon his army, they're going to take him out. But if his army goes before him, leaving his kingdom, he's going to be safe, right? So to see what he means by, I think we know where he's going. He says, "Ha nim sala adam." So he says the point of this analogy is this: if a person gives charity while he's alive, it is said of him, "Your charity will go before you," and then he has nothing to fear from the enemy, for the honor of Hashem will gather him without any opposition from any accuser. If he does not give until his death, who knows whether he will even receive for what credit for it, since the dead are exempt from the commandment. Wait. But if he does not give until after his death, who knows whether he will receive credit for it? Since he says, for since the dead are exempt from the commandments. Concerning the first group, right? It's an interesting point. Concerning the first group, and they leave their wealth to others. He says, and even if they on their own, even if their own sons inherit their wealth, nevertheless they themselves will have no satisfaction from it either after the death. Jeez, for I have seen few new out. He says, I've seen a new altitude afoot, and the masses have become very casual towards the honor of deceased parents. They make for themselves black mourning garments of the finest quality, all in the latest Gentile fashions, and they indulge themselves in feasting. Meanwhile, they treat meanwhile with disdain the honor of their parents, of whom they are meant to utilize in mourning. This is entirely the father's fault. For when one casts in he's reading a midrash. He says this is entirely the father's fault. So he's saying these people. So he's saying like basically the people who don't give, right? The people who don't give, right? That the people that don't give, their kids inherit their money, right? Right? They inherit. I didn't give, my family's gonna give, right? He said that money that they have is only, it's not going to help them. He says, for their own sons who inherit their wealth, nevertheless themselves they will have no satisfaction from it even after death. He says, for I have seen new attitudes afoot, and the masses have become very casual towards the honor of their deceased parents. And he says they make themselves black mourning garments of all the finest linen, all in the latest Gentile fashion, and then they indulge themselves in feasting. Meanwhile, they treat the disdain of they treat with disdain the honor of their parents, who they're meant to utilize and more. So they're saying, like, in our generation, there's such a lack of honor for the parents, and even people honoring their parents after they die, right? And he says they'll do all these things, like they'll dress up, whatever to do that, but their kids will have no connection to their life. They won't honor them. They won't connect, right? But they'll do all the nice stuff. That's what I understand him saying. He said this is entirely the father's fault, for when one casts a stick into the air, it comes back. Whoa. When one casts a stick into the air, it comes back down on one's head, says the Midrash. And therefore, there is no greater foolishness than this, and no one need be said. And he said, there's no more need to be said about the matter. Alkin asa hayeu salale ha'adama lechin liten sadecha bechayav be'ayan yafa. So and therefore the blessed advice for a person to give generously while he's alive, and to act in loving kindness as well. He said, for who knows when his time will be up, and whether his instructions will be fulfilled or not. The sage's principles in all such He said the sage's principle in all such circumstances is that one does not set aside the wait, the sage's principle in all such circumstances is that one does not set aside the definite for the doubtful. The best kind of charity is that which a person gives during his lifetime, and let him be sure that the recipients are worthy, as explained in the Shulchan Aruch. Then then all will then all will then all will be well with him. So you got to make sure you get to the right people. You know what I mean? And it's good to do as much as we can, giving, not just, currency, but giving our time, looking to do like volunteering projects, in the community is good. People that we know that are struggling, calling them, giving them words of inspiration, words of kindness is also a form of charity. Sending people text messages, all forms of engagement to inspire someone else and let them know you're thinking about them, and how important they are. All those things are forms of charity, right? And especially people that aren't as connected. You know what I mean? And another reason thing too, a lot of people say like, oh, Jews usually only give to Jews, right? Obviously, it's a mitzvah, but why is it a mitzvah to give to Jews? Because that money is not just from the sake of you're giving it, which changes the heart, right? And it's a mitzvah, right? But also, what the giving does is that it when you give to a Jew, then all these other mitzvahs you get credit for, right? So, like, say somebody, I go out and I get something to eat, right? And someone else, sent money or whatever, they're credited for those mitzvahs for the food, right? Not just the purchasing of the kosher food, which is a mitzvah, right? Just to buy kosher food is a mitzvah, but the eating of it, right? And the words of Torah that are said around it, like if I'm eating with someone, right? And not only that, the Berachot Mazon, right? Which is a mitzvah deraisa, right? So that's the benefit. All the Torah that's being taught, right? When a person's giving all that Torah, they have a share in that. That they have a share in that. That's the power of giving. You have a share in that Torah that person that you or anybody is behind. Your share of that Torah, not just the Torah maybe you learned by that person, the Torah that he's doing with other people and the
Mm,
projects and everything, right? So it's a massive, massive level of kedusha.
mm,
It's a massive level of kedusha, but we have to be aware of all these levels of kedusha. And then if a person's giving and a person's in somewhere like Eretz Israel where all the mitzvahs are doubled and tripled, that person gets all that kedusha. They get it. They just snatching up. They're snatching up light. You know what I'm saying? So, anyways, we should have that in mind with all of our giving. You know, and how big it is and the ripple effect and that be part of the caution of what we do give them. We want all the mitzvahs. We want mitzvahs on mitzvahs and mitzvahs. Anyway, so tomorrow we're back on. We're back in a mitzvah, a path of the just,
mhm.
and I think we're on what chapter 7 now.
Yes. And Shulchan Aruch for
Well, yeah,
44,
I think we're 45.
45.
We should be finishing up Hamotzi.
Okay.
I think if we already did finish Hamotzi, we're gonna go to another topic. We won't like go 45. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Okay.
All right, culture. Baruch atah